Thanks, Jan. Hi, everybody. I actually missed some of this morning because I was actually teaching at Warwick Business School, so I kind of shot over from Coventry about halfway through the morning. But I'm delighted to see so many of you here today. As Jan said, I'm an associate professor in marketing at Warwick Business School, and pretty much everything I do is about the next generation. So we co-founded the Marketing Insight series, which is designed to bridge the gap between academia and industry, and I'm really passionate about bringing the world of marketing to life for our students. And as such, we get to partner with wonderful firms like Hive to bring together events such as this. My other role at Warwick is I'm a course director. I'm in charge of the MSc Marketing and Strategy programme. So I currently have just welcomed 160 MSc students to Warwick. We're in the throes of the start of term, so it's a little bit hectic at the moment. But actually, my co-presenter today is a lady called Anushka Malhotra, and I'm so proud. Anushka is from last year's MSc Marketing and Strategy cohort, and at the end of their time with us at Warwick, they do a dissertation. And we offer our students the opportunity to do what we call an applied dissertation, a practical dissertation, where they go and work with an organisation on an issue or problem that the company is facing, or they want to investigate further to come out with some meaningful research results for that organisation. And Anushka did her dissertation with Hive over the summer. So I'm actually going to kick off today talking about why we need to re-examine constructs such as loyalty, but actually the majority of the conversation is going to be with Anushka. And I have to say, this is the first time she's ever done anything like this, okay? So please put yourself in her shoes. She is very nervous, but I've promised her that you are the most loveliest, friendliest bunch, and there'll be lots of smiling and encouragement from the audience, because people like us, we're kind of used to doing this stuff, but it is nerve-wracking the first time out. So why do we need to relook or re-examine things like customer loyalty? My job's not just teaching, it's research. And one of the things that I think characterises why I ended up in this job is that I was the annoying kid who, my poor parents, I would sit there and my mum would explain something to me and I'd be like, yeah, but why? And they'd be like, well, this is the reason for X, Y, Z. And I'd be like, yeah, but why? Some of you are laughing. That's essentially what research is about. It's about figuring out why. And actually, when we look at the customer experience field, there are some fundamental assumptions that we've made about constructs such as loyalty and brand advocacy that we need to unpick and really think about in more detail. So perhaps it's not about redefining customer loyalty, but it is rethinking some of the assumptions that we make about constructs such as this. And there is a dominant narrative. Not so much in the customer experience field per se, but generally in business, that loyalty is kind of the holy grail. And there are lots of things and assumptions that we make about loyalty, around things like, if customers are part of our loyalty scheme, that must mean that they are therefore loyal to our brand. Or if customers are loyal, they have this emotional connection with our brand, and we know that because they keep purchasing our products. Well, I'm sorry, that's not actually the case. The problem with loyalty is that in itself, it's become a commercialized concept. As consumers, we know that our loyalty has value to firms. Now, that doesn't mean true loyalty doesn't exist, but in the majority of times, we know as consumers that the exchange that we're giving, usually with a loyalty scheme, so our loyalty for data, we know that has more value to a firm than it actually does to us. And in fact, quite a lot of the time, the rewards we receive as customers, they don't really mean much to us. Shameless plug, but Jan and I curated a book over the summer which was launched. It's a free ebook and we will send you the link to it. But in that I wrote about the fact that I've actually streamlined the contents of my purse because I realised I had so many loyalty cards in my purse that I just didn't use. And the rewards that I was being offered by companies just weren't enough for me to keep engaging with that scheme. There were probably about 3 that I use regularly. And I was like, why am I wasting my time on all these loyalty schemes when they don't actually mean anything? So loyalty has become a commercialized concept from a customer's point of view. And we know that our loyalty has value, but in that sense, we don't always feel valued. And this is where rethinking things like brand advocacy really come in, and how we can actually think about empowering our loyal consumers. So I'm not saying that loyalty doesn't exist, but I'm just saying for the majority of consumers, perhaps it's not something that is represented through things like loyalty schemes and data. And actually, the other thing that I really like to unpick is the conflation of loyalty and habit. Quite often, as consumers, we act in a habitual way. It's about repeat purchase. We form habits. Now, in customer experience terms, habit's kind of a dirty word. We don't want people to have habits. We want them to be loyal. We want them to love our brand. But in actual fact, many times, habit's enough. Getting people to behave in the same way over and over again because you've made their life easier in some way can be as powerful as this holy grail of loyalty. And I always give the example of my toothpaste brand. Do I have an emotional connection with Colgate? Do I love the brand? I am standing here advocating for them, admittedly, but that doesn't happen very often. It's not organic advocacy. But it's not the kind of product that you would have advocacy about in people's everyday lives. My point here is, for that kind of product in itself, habit's perhaps enough. Sometimes we don't always want to be chasing consumer loyalty from all of our customers. And we do need to take a customer-eccentric approach when we start rethinking some of these things. And it is about rethinking, perhaps, what the relationship between the brand and the customer should look like. Because there's a lot of traditional ways of thinking about this. And Anushka's going to talk to you a lot about how we can perhaps rethink this relationship. But also, it is about the exchange. What does the brand want from customers, but equally, what do customers want from the brand? And a lot of the things that we've heard about today, particularly what Jamelia was talking about earlier, really is this customer-centric approach about figuring out what customers actually want in this context. And finally, the point is, what is it reasonable to expect from our customers? Is it reasonable to expect to have this devoted loyalty? Or is there some different kind of loyalty that we can expect from our customers? And by asking these kind of questions, we start to unpick and rethink the different ways we can think about loyalty and not make assumptions so that we can actually have a more customer-centric approach and closer relationships with our customers. And part of this is all about rethinking advocacy. There's a lot of assumptions made about advocacy, and one of my pet hates, those of you that know me, is that Net Promoter Score has a value in some contexts, but not in many. I really don't like it. And a lot of the times that's a proxy for brand advocacy, but advocacy is so much more than that. So I'm now going to introduce Anushka to talk to you a lot more about why brand advocacy is so much more than that. So please welcome Anushka to the stage.
Thank you. The fact that it is actually very perplexing to achieve, there is a need for the brands to, build that sort of a supreme relationship with its customers, and at the same time have a deeper understanding and foster that sort of an ideal value exchange. As Laura rightly mentioned, that there is a clear need and it is important to, to have a look at and to rethink brand advocacy. So the main idea of this research was not only to uncover what brand advocacy means to customers and to the executives, but at the same time to propose what brand advocacy should look like. So therefore, in order to have a better understanding and to explore where the future of marketing is possibly headed, let's dive deeper into the concept of brand advocacy. So where brand advocacy truly lies at the moment is synonymous with what we know as word of mouth and referrals. Not much to our surprise, precisely because what we think brand advocacy is, it is just simply customers engaging in that sort of a positive communication about the brand with other customers and possibly even recommending and referring the brands to other customers. Intriguingly, a vast body of research also identifies viral marketing with brand advocacy. We are very much aware of the fact that the key driver of viral marketing is nothing but sharing messages about the brand with the customers exponentially in order to generate awareness, elicit interest, and boost sales. But assuming that these three concepts can be equated to brand advocacy in its entirety is a major, major misconception. Primarily because this misconception is accounted towards our partial understanding around the concept of brand advocacy. Typically because these three concepts, they are built on an underlying theme of mere exploiting peer-to-peer communication, but there is much, much more to brand advocacy. There is a deeper level to brand advocacy, and our current understanding does not really match up with that, with the true potentials of brand advocacy. Brand advocacy overall offers something more than peer-to-peer communication. And if you have a look at the general broad sense and the broad term of the advocacy which is used, apparently the Cambridge University Press 2011 identifies or rather defines advocacy as to publicly support and to suggest an idea, development, or a way of doing something. And clearly, it suggests a very collaborative approach to the concept, but if you look at our current understanding around brand advocacy, it lacks that element of collaboration. So building on the overarching definition of advocacy which is suggested, and also building on the relevant research constructs, we propose brand advocacy as to promote and support the company by positively talking about and recommending the brand to a wider cohort, while also actively collaborating through co-creating, crowdsourcing, and building or engaging in a brand community. So in a nutshell, brand advocacy is an integrated concept, and it is much more than just word of mouth and referrals. In fact, it is an extension to it, and the freshness to the concept lies in the embodiment of the three facets of collaboration, which are crowdsourcing, co-creation, and community. Now that we have a sense of what brand advocacy actually looks like to the masses, and now that we've suggested what brand advocacy should look like, the idea of this research was to basically develop a framework and then testify it through qualitative research. The ultimate objective and the rationale of this research was to enable the practitioners and marketers to be able to unpick those manners within the commercial sphere that either pushes the customer towards performing the brand advocacy or pulls a customer away from performing the brand advocacy action. The research was conducted in two parts with 13 customer respondents and 5 customer experts as our subject. So the approach involved collecting rich and meaningful data through a qualitative research, but on a relatively smaller scale, because the idea was to initially validate and exploratory testing. Moving forward, this study sets as a base for further empirical exploratory research with a relatively larger sample size in order to further validate the test results. It did deliver some obvious and apparent determinants, which we are very much aware of, but they are very important because they not only validate and reinforce previous studies, but it also sets the base right for us. And it also delivered very interesting and very innovative and novel insights, few of which also refuted and argues the relevance of previously established motives. It additionally identified 8 determinants or factors that determine the likelihood for a particular customer to become a brand advocate, and at the same time, it identifies 3 factors or influencers that possibly impact the relationship between the intention to perform the advocacy action and at the same time, towards the end of the day, performing the action towards the end. Getting back to the 8 drivers and the inhibitors, it did deliver some apparent and obvious drivers which we're very much aware of and we know that are quite important. Some of them were like making life easy, knowing the personality of the customer, valuing the worth and the valuing the customer's self-worth, and building that sort of relationship with the customer. But what we would like to direct your attention towards is something that Laura already mentioned. Customer orientation is very important for brands to inculcate within their organization. Much of the research around customer centricity identified exceeding expectations as a key and a very vital element to customer orientation. And much of research around the drivers of word of mouth and referrals have also identified offering delight to the customer as one of the drivers. But what this research suggests that, according to the equity theory in psychology, which states that a rational normal consumer is actually looking at a fair value of exchange, keeping that as the context, the willingness to exert some time and effort towards performing a particular brand advocacy act is very much relative to the value that you've received. In a sense, what consumers believe that the fact that getting yourself engaged in positive word of mouth and recommendations for a brand does not involve much time and effort. In that context, they are not really expecting to be delighted by the brand. On the other hand, for the rest of the activities that involves much more time and effort, they would want to be exceeded by their expectations would want to be exceeded by the brand. Moving forward to motivation, we are all aware that referrals and referral programs and reward schemes, they are primarily based on monetary and economic rewards. And scholars have argued the dangers of having such prompted schemes because it kind of creates that sort of a danger in terms of creating biases. What we propose that, what this research proposes is that economic rewards is a motivational driver, but it is not supposed to be treated as a prompt, but it is supposed to be treated as a token of appreciation. And there are several other extrinsic motivators as well in terms of maintaining that sort of maximum efficacy and deriving better service at the end of the day. Surprisingly, a major chunk of customers were also driven intrinsically, and altruism, that is the willingness to help other customers and the brand without expecting anything in return, also topped the list of intrinsic motivators. Now, at this point in time, the level of relationship that consumers have with the brands is very much transactional. And scholars have argued that the current space that brands are currently operating in is so volatile that there is a need to build that sort of an emotional connect with the customers. And much of the research around, again, word of mouth and referrals have identified an emotional connection or that sort of an effective commitment as a motivator and as a key driver. But according to a social exchange theory in psychology, which bases its roots on cost and benefit analysis, basing on that proposition, what we propose is that the level of relationship is very contextual, and in not every instance you will be able to create that sort of an emotional connection. The level of relationship that you maintain with your brand, it actually is a determinant of the decision and the degree to which a consumer is willing to exert that time and effort to perform that advocacy action is very relative. Lastly, brand purpose and values. We're all aware of this idea and the concept of consumer brand identification. It is nothing where it is based on the self-schema theory, wherein a customer tends to identify with a particular brand when the schema of that particular target object overlaps or matches with your schema. And having that sort of a connection, that connection with that brand, or being able to strongly identify with the brand and believing in the purpose and the values of the brand, did come across as a very strong and a significant indicator of enabling the customer to actually unlock higher levels of involuntary advocacy actions. Other than the 8 drivers, the research also produced 3 moderators, or rather factors that influences the relationship between the drive to advocate for the brand and the ultimate the ultimate advocacy behavior. Time was the major concern that came into play. Time is a very precious commodity for the customers, and it is their conscious choice and decision on the way they want to exert and spend their time. Nothing, simply put, the fact that the willingness to advocate for a brand is very much dependent on the time that is involved in performing that particular advocacy action, be it word of mouth, be it referrals, or any of the 3 C's of collaboration. But it is also determined on the degree and the intensity to which the drive to perform that advocacy action is engraved within the customer. Again, the skills, your interest, money, confidence, and logistics also played a major role in terms of moderating that relationship between the intention and the final performance of advocacy action. Surprisingly, brand image turned out to be a big major revelation. Consumers suggested that they had that sort of a hesitance to associate themselves with a brand that does not hold a very strong and a positive image within the society. So therefore, they were really conscious about being associated with such a brand. So brand image turned out to be a very major influencing factor. Other than the drivers and the inhibitors and the moderators, there were several insights that also were produced in the process of the qualitative research that was conducted that did not necessarily add to the model, but it presents a sort of a very nuanced and an intricate picture of the current state of affairs, some of which will not come to us as a surprise, while others were sort of a revelation. As Laura mentioned, it is not necessary for loyalty to actually come across as loyalty. What brands consider loyalty and commitment may actually be a case of customers feeling like a hostage, majorly because of prolonged habits or maybe because of high switching costs. A major chunk of your customers may come across as trend followers. They may be associating to your brand, or maybe they may be using your brand in the way of matching up with the trend, and not necessarily because they are actually associating or they're committed to the use of your brand. A major chunk of your customers are not aware of what brand community actually means. Most of them associate brand community with mere online and social media forums, wherein the others who actually know what brand advocacy, what community participation actually means, they have stressed on the fact that community participation actually triggers future and additional purchases as well. Going forward, in order to trigger or rather activate your brand advocates, it is very critical to set the foundation right by making life easy for the customers, providing that seamless experience, and instilling a positive emotion at the right time. We cannot stress enough on the fact that customer centricity is very important. It is important that you articulate your brand purpose and values amongst your employees so that they are able to live up to the customer-oriented values and build that sort of relationship with your customers. Again, we cannot stress enough on the fact that it is very important for you to know what adds value to your customers. Because having that sort of a superficial understanding of your customer will not suffice, because we're operating in very different contexts, in a different business environment and different sectors. So it is very important for you to know what actually adds value to your customers. We've heard cases wherein brands have treated collaboration and the 3 C's of collaboration and brand advocacy in a very siloed and an individual manner. And much of the research around brand advocacy and collaboration is also very fragmented. But if you see and if you give it a deeper look and a deeper thought, the activities of the 3 C's of collaboration as well, they tend to overlap with each other. And it is very important for you to have an integrated approach to make the most out of the brand advocacy as an approach. Next being, it is very important for you to not confuse between brand advocacy and customer engagement. Although both of them may come across as very similar because the activities may tend to overlap and there are a lot of commonalities, but there are key differences between the two in case of customer engagement in terms of valence, wherein you can have a positive or a negative customer engagement. There is a modality in the sense that there is a particular way that customers choose to perform the customer engagement. It may be momentary, or it may be geographic. Or lastly, there is a specific purpose in order to perform the customer engagement. Both these activities are very much important, but it is very critical for brands to understand the incidence of it and implement them at the right time. Lastly, each and every brand is actually looking at achieving that sort of brand love. It is very much possible, provided we consider love as a relationship and not as a feeling. And once you've unlocked that, you will be able to deepen brand relationships, and you will be able to achieve that sort of super advocate level. Just to wrap up quickly, there are 6 top tips that we would like you to leave with. First being, make lives of your customers easy. Your customers are not looking at buying products or services. At the end of the day, they are just looking at brands that offer them the best possible solution that will make their life easy. A key tip, do have a look at the jobs to be done approach. It is an amazing tool. Do have a look at it in order to cater to this particular tip. Next being, align your shared values with customers' values in order to achieve that sense of consumer brand identification, because that is very important for you to enable the customer to get to that level of naturally and voluntarily getting themselves involved into the higher levels of brand advocacy behavior. Consumers have stressed on the importance of having that human element, which is very important in the wake of building that sort of relationship with your customers. So therefore, empower your employees so that they are able to bridge the gap between the brand and the customer. Do not treat brand advocacy in silos. Treat this concept as an integrated effort and try to reap the maximum benefit out of it. Customers' time is valuable to both you and your customer. It is customer's conscious decision where he or she wants to invest their time. Try to earn the customer's time as much as you can so that you're able to get the maximum value out of your customer as well. Lastly, consumers are very much conscious about being associated with a brand that does not hold a very strong image in the society. So try to maintain that sort of a credible and a positive image in the society in order to maintain that trust amongst your potential advocates. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anushka. I think Laura and I kind of very proud at that moment. Kind of my first question, Anushka, is: are you sure that's the first time you presented? Because that was pretty brilliant.
Yes, that definitely was.
That was great. Laura, do you want to come back to the stage as well?
Yeah.
But the one that really interested me around that whole piece of research is the value proposition and how we kind of create it with customers. And I feel that and I've seen this with brands, where brands go off and create their values, which are, sometimes really good. We see them often when we walk into a building and they're plastered on the walls. But there's a disconnect between what they believe in and what the consumers believe in should be their values. How do we bring that back together?
Good question, Yanis. It is very weird that there was a point wherein I asked Yanis a question in a similar format, and it genuinely was a very nice question, and Yanis did not acknowledge the fact that it was. But credits were due, Yanis. It is an amazing question. Getting back to the point. Now, the thing with brands at the moment that came across even in the research is that brands are afraid to kind of take consumers off. As much as they believe in certain set of things, they don't stand by it because they're afraid that they will actually upset a major chunk of the society. So in a way, they're actually being disloyal to their set of customers just so that they're able to please the crowd. That was one thing that actually came across in the research. The fact that consumers said that they are I identify myself with them for a reason, but just because they want to please the crowd and they don't stick by their espoused values. And often there is a disparity between what they state they believe in and what they actually deliver. There is a mismatch between having espoused values and your shared values, primarily because brands are actually afraid to take a section of your customers, and in that, just to attract that set of customers as well, they are actually losing out on the customers that actually trust and believe in them. So I guess that's one problem there.
Great answer.
Thank you.
And Laura, kind of, why do you think that is? Why do you think that brands are struggling to deliver on their values?
I had a really great answer to the previous question.
Oh, did you?
Me another one.
Do you want to do both?
No, it's fine. What was the question? Why do brands
Yeah,
struggle?
why are they struggling to, they kind of create these great values, why are they struggling to actually act on them and deliver on those values?
I think there's a number of things that, I mean, I do a lot of consultancy work in organisations, and so there's often an internal disconnect that happens. So, you know, there's a lot of lip service played to what we want to do, but in actual fact, it doesn't translate down to actions. And I think there's a lot there around empowering employees to own what the brand value is and actually be advocates themselves. So I think when we talk about advocacy as well, it's important to recognise that we're not just necessarily always just talking about customer advocacy. Actually, employee advocacy is really important. And actually, one thing that struck me about Jamilia's presentation is exactly that. The whole treasure chest team, I should say, I taught Jamilia as well, I know Jamilia quite well. The whole treasure chest team, like, walk the walk and talk the talk. Like, they are literally advocating for the brand every single step of the way, every single day. So I think that's the internal stuff's really important. So empowering employees, but also in terms of closing the gap with your customers, there's also a piece there about understanding that you're not immediately going to have everybody as your advocate. So people kind of don't see the return on investment if you only start with 1 or 2 advocates. But actually what you need to do is build advocacy momentum. So people don't necessarily see the value in having 1 or 2 advocates that somehow they invest in or have that relationship with, because they don't see that in the longer term that will grow and build, because that is the nature of true, genuine, authentic advocacy. So there's something there as well about understanding how advocacy can grow and develop, and it's not, you're not just going to flick a switch and have a ton of brand advocates in your customer base overnight. But a lot of the things that Anushka's talked about in terms of her research are sort of thinking about how you can move people towards becoming active brand advocates for your particular firm.
Absolutely, and I think that's kind of it, isn't it? It's kind of starting organically, really, and letting that kind of advocacy momentum. I like that term. I'm going to use that.
I thought you would.
That's all right. Thanks.
By the way, I said that, not you. Just Laura Chamberlain said that. That's not out of his mouth. Okay, when he steals it for his own, just.
It's kind of the greatest thing of a marketeer, right? To kind of like repurpose. Has anyone else got any questions for kind of Laura or Anushka? Martin.
Yeah, just a quick question, hopefully. How might this change what you should be measuring inside a company? Or is that, I know it's a quick question.
Great question.
How do I start? How does it change what you should be measuring? Well, it depends what you're trying to do with your measure. So usually we're trying to find some kind of measure of success. So I suppose it depends it's actually redefining what the measurement tools are trying to do and then how that informs the business. So there are lots of different things that we could look at in terms of your internal processes, sort of measuring up to optimizing the potential for brand advocacy. Do you want to measure whether you are actually converting people from having advocacy intention to becoming actual advocates? There's lots of different things you could kind of measure along the way. And thank you for playing into my hands, because one of the things about Net Promoter Score is that it doesn't, thank you, it can be a little bit of a band-aid on a situation. And in some contexts, it really is useful. But in many contexts, there isn't kind of organic advocacy, or people wouldn't actually recommend that service naturally to friends and family. And it's used as a proxy to tap into something deeper. And one of the things that I talk a lot about is the fact that we need to rethink our measurement and actually work on bespoke measurement for organisations, for their product or service in their customer base, to actually understand what is appropriate in terms of measuring success, because we're all a lot of times using a band-aid that's actually sending people off on wild goose chases. So there isn't a neat answer to that question. It's kind of it needs more work. But I think that's what's so exciting about doing work like this, is that you lay the foundations for figuring things out where you can have more meaningful measurement of stuff. So.
Wonderful. Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got.
Sorry.
But I know you're around anyway,
Yep.
kind of over drinks later. So we've got cocktails coming up and kind of beer, wine and all of that. So kind of
just because there's drinks doesn't mean I'm going to be here, by the way. You did make it sound like, obviously, there's going to be drinks, so Laura's here.
Good point. It's true. Round of applause for Laura and Anushka.